Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today is day 20 of the Crucible League, and I wanted to have a look at the solo self-found meta, have a look at what's doing well, what's overperforming, what's underperforming. Now, a quick note, I have already done a video like this on the Trade League, and it was people's feedback there saying they wanted some discussion of SSF. That's the reason I decided I would do the research to put this one out. So if you want to see the earlier version of this video that looks at the day 10 meta in softcore trade, I'll put a link to that down in the description below. Solo self-found, of course, is a little bit different. It's a hard mode which adds new limitations. Another thing I'll quickly point out is that if you have watched the Trade League video already, that was put out just as the totem explosion builds were starting to get discussed a little bit. Those have been a lot more refined over the next 10 days. That means that you'll start to see those appearing in this video because they're about 5% of the SSF meta now, and I think that that number is likely to increase over time. So for methodology, like any of the other videos I've done on the metagame, I go by GGG's publication of the ladder, which is a list of the top 15,000 characters by XP, and this is then scraped by the website POE.ninja. Their aggregation has improved this league, and so they have a lot more characters on it than they normally would, but I'm looking at the characters that are level 85 and above in this video, except where I specify otherwise. Now, POE Ninja does this for all 8 combinations of hard modes. For solo self-found, you can have that rule set on or off. For hardcore, you can have that rule set on or off. And for Ruthless, you can have that rule set on and off. That's 8 different combinations. POE Ninja covers them all. But this video is going to be on softcore, non-Ruthless, and with the solo self-found rule set in play. Now, it's always the case that the harder you make things, the more people tend to congregate on the very best options, and the less people mess around with things that aren't proven performers. You'll see that here, there's less build diversity in solo self-found than there is in the Trade League, and this is a pretty normal thing. So what's changed from 3.20 to 3.21? Darkness Enthroned was buffed a lot, but lots of people don't have it, and so utilization of this item is hardly changed. Especially in solo self-found, it can be a little bit harder to get this because the change being made was that it used to be 75% increased effect of the Abyssal Jewels socketed in it. Now it is a roll range between 50 and 100%. If you pick up one of these and it's only 68%, that's actually worse than you would have had last league. Whereas if you pick one up and it's 86%, then it's going to be better. Now, if you've only picked up one Darkness Enthroned so far this league, and I think that's going to be pretty common for a lot of people, it's not like it's super common unless you're really targeting Abyss hard, then in that situation, the buff is likely not to have improved your access to this item. But if you are going for higher character levels, you'll start to see Darkness Enthroned pop up more because it is better than it used to be. Devouring Diadem use is way down compared to last league, and that's because the item is harder to target farm now. Now, I believe a lot of players who in the past would have planned their build around the reasonable expectation that they would have a Devouring Diadem pretty early, those people have instead planned around not ever getting the item, and this means that even though some of them might have got it, they might have made another plan like allocating Eldritch Battery on the passive tree instead. As a result, they may not even use a Devouring Diadem if they do get one. Now, Molten Shell was nerfed hard between 320 and 321, but it is still used by a majority of high-level players in solo self-found. You really know that the skill was overpowered when last league it was twice as powerful as it is now, and it is still on a majority of characters at high level. Also, the Saboteur Ascendancy overhaul pretty much killed the Trapper archetype. Now, there are going to, of course, be some exceptions to this. Fire Trap is being used, but that's primarily as a Righteous Fire character, although there are a couple of exceptions to that, and Fire Trap is still in a fine place even outside the Righteous Fire build. But then you've got the Totem explosion builds. That said, Saboteur went from the top Ascendancy to 1.25% of high-level players, and that has been an absolute gutting. Now, bow use is up this league from 21% to 32%, and bow skill choice is much more diverse. Now, some of these people are actually playing the bow-based versions of the Totem explosion builds, but even once you exclude them, bow use is still way up. Amongst bow users that are not just playing a trap build in disguise, you have Lightning Arrow, you have Toxic Rain, you have Artillery Ballista, you have Explosive Arrow Ballista, and you have Ice Shot all being used. So the bow overhauls seem to have done really well. They've encouraged people to give serious thought to using bow skills again, and the people that are using them are definitely getting paid off for doing so. There's almost no use of Vile Firestorm, just like in Trade League. I'm sad about that. I kind of want that skill to be better than it is. Finally, the Crucible mechanic grants ways to target farm a couple of uniques that have not been target farmable in any realistic sense, at least in 3.20. These are Aegis Aurora and also Soul Taker. Now, Soul Taker is not so much used itself, but it's used to create Kingmaker, which is then something that you can use as an attack weapon. Now, no one is really doing this in solo self-found. Aegis use is actually down on 3.20, which really surprised me. I was expecting it to be up, and not a single player over level 85 has Kingmaker equipped. If you're interested in target farming these specific uniques, what you do is you put champion kite shields, assuming you want to chase an Aegis Aurora, into the Crucible mechanic, and just have a look once you've done it to see if it's got any of the Uber vendor options. One of the Uber vendor options is vendors for an additional unique champion kite shield, which will be an Aegis Aurora. This is not common, but it is not staggeringly rare either, and it is by far the easiest way to target farm this specific item. And you can do exactly the same thing with Siege Axes if you want to get a Soul Taker in order to use it in the vendor recipe to generate a Kingmaker. No one is really doing this, and as we say, Aegis use is actually down on what it was last league. Okay, let's talk Ascendancy Spread. Those of you that watched the previous video on the Trade League meta will know that the Ascendancy Spread in Trade was better than what it is in Solo Self-Found. And like I say, the addition of hard mode mods like Solo Self-Found does constrain what's needed in order for a build to be successful. You'll see here that the top 3 Ascendancies are 50% of the meta. And whilst that is not particularly great build diversity, it's reasonably close to typical for SSF. So, much less diversity than Trade, Juggernaut and Champion are very well suited to Solo Self-Found. And that's just because they work really well on limited gear. Now, while the Champion is performing fine at the moment, it's not something that's absolutely dominant or anything like it. Juggernaut, however, is in an excellent spot. The Ascendancy is in a very good spot at the moment. It's widely regarded as the best Ascendancy for 2 of the most budget-friendly builds, and as a result, Juggernauts are a full quarter of the Solo Self-Found meta. Some other Ascendancies are not huge performers, but are absolutely solid in one niche. So Champion's the absolute king of tanky physical damage over time builds, as well as being okay all around. Also, some Ascendancies are notoriously bad in Solo Self-Found. Ascendant, for example, is an Ascendancy that is miles better if your character owns Unnatural Instinct. This item is very, very rare. Most Solo Self-Found players do not have one. And as a result, Ascendant tends to be better in Trade League than it is in Solo Self-Found. There's a number of other mechanics with Ascendant as well. Just generally anything that's tied heavily to jewels for a lot of its power ends up being worse in SSF than in Trade. So let's have a look at those builds. Firstly, our top performer at the moment is Boneshatter. 69% of people who are playing this build are on a Juggernaut, which is nice, and 30% are playing a Slayer. Almost universally, people are using a two-handed rare axe. Sinvictor's Metal is a weapon that is used often to get started, but people do want to try and outgrow it at some point. Even though Sinvictor's is a fine item, you can definitely get yourself a much better item nowadays. Now, there are 2 uniques that are very commonly used here. Tanuahi, the gloves, are used a lot on the Juggernaut versions of this build, and Carnage Heart is used on both the Juggernaut and the Slayer version. Now, both of these items are very common, and as a result, they're used a very large amount. Rare items pretty much everywhere else on the build, and like I say, Kingmaker is farmable, but no one is doing so at the moment. Now, this is the top build except amongst the very highest level characters. So this is the build that's performing best for getting people up to level 85, 90, 92, 93, 94, 95, but it starts to fall off once you go past 95, at which point you'll start seeing the bow builds take over. Righteous Fire and Fire Trap is next. This is a build that has been very good for a very long time. It's the second most popular SSF build this league. 90% of people playing it are on the Juggernaut, 8% are still on Inquisitor, which was the best choice 2 leagues ago and is still fine now. And then there's some Chieftains and some Elementalists. This build is a lot better if you can get to the Maven, beat her a few times, and get the Legacy of Fury boots from her. Legacy of Fury is the most common of her unique items to drop, and it is incredibly good on a Righteous Fire character. Additionally, these builds are using Immortal Flesh in their belt slot a very large amount because it just solves so many problems that this build has, and it's not like a Juggernaut has too much difficulty with the drawback on Immortal Flesh, which is it decreases to their elemental resistances, because they can pretty easily build those up somewhere else. Immortal Flesh is just a fantastic item for getting started on this build, and whilst in Trade League you might be able to graduate past it by getting a Hunter influenced or an Elder influenced Stygian Vice, that's a little bit harder to do in the Solo Self-Found world. A lot of people focus on getting their Immortal Flesh and then not improving past it. The next category of builds, I want to call these Vengeant Cascade builds. These are bow builds that use the anointment only notable passive skill Vengeant Cascade. Now this grants a couple of things. 15% increased projectile speed, neither here nor there. It's an upside, but it's not that important. Then attack projectiles return to you from their final target, and returning projectiles pierce all targets. This thing is incredibly good. Now this is something that you can target farm, but it takes a fair while to target farm it because you're going to need 2 gold oils in order to anoint Vengeant Cascade. So that's going to mean that you're going to need to focus on Blight for a little while if you're in solo self-found. Trade League, it's fine, you can just bypass this step and just trade directly for the golden oils, but that's not an option in SSF. You have to earn them yourself, and that means you're running some Blight. But once you do this, the payoff is enormous. Fully 30% of level 100s in solo self-found have this notable on their character build. Now, most of them are playing Lightning Arrow builds, but it's not exclusively Lightning Arrow. Cascade is also used on Artillery Ballista, Ice Shot, Molten Strike, Frostblades, and much, much more, and it's probably the single most powerful passive on the entire passive tree now. Having discussed that, Lightning Arrow is going to be one of the next top performing builds. Number 3 overall build in solo self-found on level 85 plus characters, but it's number 1 on level 100s. Vengeant Cascade is the reason why. This build is phenomenally strong. Artillery Ballista needs to be mentioned here. Now this is used a lot on the same bow builds we've already discussed, plus on more. It's a huge part of the SSF meta, even though it's generally not used as a sole skill. Usually it's used alongside something else. Now, of course, we have the newcomer, Totem Explosions. These are not really covered much in the video on the Trade League because they were something that really only started getting seriously discussed on day 8 and day 9 of the league. And by day 10, when I put that video out, not enough people had leveled them for them to be a big part of the meta. That has changed now. Totem Explosion, Crucible mods, and Rejuvenation Totem or Devouring Totem are being used on about 5% of high-level characters. And this keeps going up over time because a lot of people feel like this is probably not going to remain in the game at its current power level, and it's an extremely good top-end boss killer. Now, most people who are using this tech are following Zizzarin's build guide. That is definitely one option. Zizzarin advocates using a bow with the Crucible mod and then pumping up the gem levels on that bow. So that's one of the things that you can do. There are a lot of ways that you can build Totem Explosions, and I think it's going to come down to finding the way that propagates damage from pack to pack best, because this build is very, very good at taking out bosses very, very fast, no matter which version of it you play. Finally, I want to discuss the question of breakout uniques, and nothing really stands out as a breakout unique, as something that wasn't being used much or maybe didn't exist in 320, and that is being used a lot in solo self-found in 321. There is a new chess piece called the Fourth Vow that's incredibly good, but it's quite rare and it's hard to use it well in solo self-found. For that reason, it's certainly not a breakout unique here. I do need to do another video on it, but that's more aimed at Trade League players. Vengeant Cascade is the closest thing we have here. It's not a unique, obviously, but it's something you can target farm and that sort of takes up one slot, and it's sort of the same for everyone, but it's not technically a unique item. That's the closest thing we have to a breakout unique though, as all of the uniques that are being used a lot this league generally were being used last league as well. That's all I've got on the SSF meta. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.